Hey guys, my name is Michelle and I garden in Atlanta, Georgia, and I wanted to walk around with the plant haul that I recently bought and show you how I think about adding to a garden and garden design in general. I am just your average homeowner, not a garden designer at all, but I've been playing around in my garden for over a decade, so hopefully I can share a couple of best practices with you that I try to use when I'm thinking about my garden and kind of designing beds, and that could help you as you're thinking about your garden. So notice I said best practices earlier and not rules. We have enough rules in our life that we don't have to go by and make more rules for our garden and outdoor spaces. I like to think about my garden space as my creative playground. Basically, I'm a painter just with plants instead of paint. And so try not to pay attention to too many garden rules, but instead kind of like best practices or rules of thumb as you're designing your garden spaces. So if you missed that haul video, I will post a link to it right here. I am a primarily perennial gardener, so the majority of the things that I grow in my garden are perennials because you plant them once and then they come back year after year and look better and better. And over time, you can even divide them and spread them around your garden. I just feel like if you're looking at an empty lawn right now, wondering how you will ever be able to afford creating a beautiful garden, definitely stick with perennials and shrubs. Those are going to give you the most bang for your buck long term. In terms of thinking about your garden space, the number one rule of thumb that is more of a rule than it is a guideline is to be realistic about what kind of light you have in your garden bed. Do not try to plant something that needs full sun in a part sun to shade bed. Just because you really wanted that plant to live there doesn't mean that it will be happy. I feel like that is the quickest way to kill a plant and to see it underperform and to watch it slowly get diseased and die is by planting a full sun plant in an area that is mostly part sun or mostly shade. Full sun really does mean full sun. Trust me, I have killed so many plants thinking it's sunny enough, what could happen, but it's just not worth it. Also, the reverse applies. If you have a plant that you absolutely love, but it requires shade and you plant it in part sun, it will burn to a crisp, wither away and die. So before buying any plants, before planting anything, make sure you know what the sun conditions for your bed are. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can buy little gadgets and gizmos that'll track the light that you can add in the soil. It's like a little light meter. There are different apps out there that'll track the location of the sun relative to your bed. I personally like to just pick a sunny day on a weekend or a day that I am home and set an alarm on my phone, come out every hour and take a picture. That way I'm able to see if within one long bed there's areas that are full sun and then patches due to kind of branches and whatnot that are more part sun. And it really does give you an idea of how much sun that bed truly gets. Now remember, the position of the sun is going to be different in the spring versus the summer versus the fall. What I've kind of noticed is that if the bed gets full sun during the summer, then the plants just seem to do better. That's what I've noticed. In spring, before the leaves leaf out, I have a lot of kind of areas that are full sun. For whatever reason, as long as the plant is getting full sun during those summer months, it seems to do well, even if during the fall it gets less sun because the sun has kind of shifted behind a tree line. That's what I've noticed. I'll share that with you. I don't know if it's correct, but that's just been my general rule of thumb. In the summer, if it's full sun, I plant full sun areas. Even if in the spring or the fall, the sun has kind of shifted and it's more of a part sun. Seems to work. So let me show you a bed that's looking really good right now and why I like it. So this bed right here is looking really good and is a good example of kind of how to think about layers. Sometimes layers for me happen on accident, but in general, I try to have a focal point in the bed, which is one taller, likely more upright plant that draws your eye to the bed. And then you want to have a middle layer and a lower layer. If you're feeling fancy, you can do 4 layers or have the space. But let me show you this bed right here. In the springtime, this is my middle layer. This is a tough stuff hydrangea and it blooms absolutely beautifully. Right now it's not blooming, but that's okay because my middle layer is this Rudbeckia right here that starts blooming in the summertime, really picks up the slack for the hydrangea in the summer. Also in the middle layer, I have this opalescence phlox. This is a reblooming phlox. It started blooming in the early summer and now is reblooming. That's another key tip. If you incorporate reblooming perennials in your garden, you don't really have to think about staggered bloom times as much because they will repeat bloom for you and keep that layer looking interesting even after they're done blooming the first time. And the lower layer right here is Autumn Joy Sedum. This is a sedum that I pretty much have everywhere in the garden because once you have it, it's very easy to divide and move around. This is a late summer to fall blooming perennial, but honestly, I feel like the foliage looks good all season long. Speaking of foliage, that is another thing that I like to incorporate in the garden because blooms come and go and foliage pretty much is here forever. You can see some alocasia peeking out in the corner. That was given to me by a neighbor and will pop up wherever it wants to pop up, but oftentimes it's in a pretty good spot, so I leave it. Leaning on foliage in your garden beds will make a bed look lush throughout the whole season instead of just when something's in bloom or out of bloom. So definitely adding a combination of both foliage and blooms in different layers is going to help create that lush, full garden that you're after. Same concept here in this garden bed. Lower level are the hostas. You can see the alocasias repeated again here. The hydrangea is my middle layer and my persimmon tree is my top layer. You can see this is an example of where there's practically no blooms. These blooms are very, very aged. Hostas are all done blooming, but because we're leaning on foliage here, it still looks pretty interesting for how late it is in the summer. Although I will share that these hostas are definitely looking very crispy, as they should during September. What's that expression? Is it I'm beating a dead horse with a stick? That might be what I'm doing here. Same thing. The Japanese maple is my top layer focal point. I'm going to insert a picture of when these roses are in bloom, but I do have a drift of Atlas roses here. Those bloom their heads off all year long, have performed really well for me. They're taking a short break here. They're full of buds, but I just didn't time this video correctly. That's been a great performer in my garden if you're looking for a rose that is disease resistant and very floriferous. And then the next layer down, I have this Russian sage that is denim and lace Russian sage. This is a summer bloomer. In the spring and early summer, I just recently cut these back yet again. This is Magic Wands White Wands Veronica. This blooms non-stop. So normally I just have the roses and the White Wands Veronica, 3 layers, but then in the summertime when the Russian sage is in bloom, then I almost have a 4-layer effect depending on when things are in bloom or when things are resetting to rebloom. Another great first layer is this lamb's ear that's behind me. I love anything with the silvery foliage, and this thing is incredible. I started off with just 1 lamb's ear and I've been able to spread it all throughout my garden because it is so easy to divide and it grows so well. So this is the bed that has kind of been giving me some second thoughts, and I think it's because I don't have many layers in here. Now some of the layers are still growing because I planted a smaller plant and I need to be patient, but also as I was thinking about this bed, I realized was all of my vertical interest is back here and not really carried forward towards the front of the bed. So back here I have this Slenderella, which will grow very tall and slender. It's something that you have to stake as it grows. This oak leaf hydrangea will get about 6 feet tall, but then as you come forward, all of this right here stays in that 3 feet tall range, and there's not much variation in height all the way to the end of the bed. And so I want to break that up and add in some of these grasses. This is a grass that grows very upright and narrow. I believe it gets 4 to 5 feet tall and maybe only 18 inches wide. So I grabbed 3 of these so that I'm still getting some of that vertical interest towards the back of the bed. And I also ordered, and it's going right here, a summerific hibiscus. This is the first one that I've ever ordered. It is summerific. I forgot, it's the red one. I completely forgot. It's the red one It's the red one that has the purplish foliage. And the reason that I got it is because the foliage is almost the same color as the spent blooms. And the thing that drives me insane about hibiscus is that yes, it has these beautiful, incredible large blooms, but they last one day and then that bloom turns into a weepy looking tissue that you then have to remove, or you're looking at a weepy looking tissue. So I went with this hibiscus because the foliage is almost the same color as the spent blooms, so it should camouflage the thing that drives me the craziest about hibiscus, which means it should work in my garden. So I hope that made sense. I've been looking at this bed trying to figure out what was kind of off about it. I realized that I'm missing kind of a height back here, and I know the varieties of everything in here because I planted them myself this year. If you're moving into a house and you're inheriting a landscape, it might be a little bit different for you. What I would do in that case is take a tape measure so that you understand the height of everything now, especially if it's more mature, and then try to plant around that. So maybe bringing in a drift of lamb's ear or a perennial that reblooms throughout the season as that first layer, and then incorporating something that's a little bit taller. Maybe it's a taller shrub like your oak leaf hydrangeas. Maybe it's a tree that stays very slender and upright, or maybe it's some grasses that grow taller than there are wider. Hopefully that helps you think about the holes you might be having in your garden and how you can kind of plug them. The remaining perennials that I picked up from the Growers Outlet plant haul will be going to kind of remedy this bed right here. This bed was one that I put together earlier this season with the plants that I had available to me at the time. And it's also missing some of those layers that I love to see in a garden bed. Plus, as I was laying out the bed, I made one pretty critical garden mistake that I want to share with you so that as you're planning out your space, you don't do what I did. The way that I laid this bed out right here makes it very hard to mow the lawn because you have to cut in right here. And then there's a very awkward patch of triangular grass that I left back there that requires a lot of maneuverability with a lawnmower that lawnmowers just don't really tend to do. So the plan is to fill in some of the holes and the gaps that you're seeing with some of the perennials that I picked up from Growers Outlet. This grass stays relatively narrow. I'm going to expand the border a little bit, tuck in the coreopsis that I bought right here, which will really help bring back that bottom layer. Coreopsis is one of those perennials that blooms multiple times a season, so it's going to be a good candidate to bring in as that bottom layer. I might also be able to divide up some of the lamb's ear and tuck it in here. Like I said, lamb's ear just kind of goes everywhere. And then I picked up a couple of these dianthus to plant them right along the driveway. If you've ever tried to plant anything along the driveway, you know how much gravel is often under the soil in these areas. Dianthus will appreciate all of the rocks and the good drainage that is likely under this strip of grass right here. So this is the perfect thing to plant if you're trying to plant along the edge of your driveway. And then the last thing I'm going to tuck into this bed is this hibiscus. This is the hibiscus that I picked up called Head Over Heels Blush. It is also one that has a darker purplish foliage, and I picked it up because I think it would contrast so beautifully with this grass that has a little bit of yellow in it and this Caryopteris that has a little bit of yellow in it. So this is the last kind of thing that I picked up, and I think I'm going to try to tuck in right here and see how it does. Because I'm able to kind of plant higher up on the hill, I'll have enough room for it at its mature height and width, and I think it would fill in this bed really beautifully. And then in the grassy part below it, there is some dappled shade in that area, so I'm gonna have to get creative with what I plant there and make sure that I'm planting things that will tolerate and thrive in a little bit of shade. I am going to shop my garden before I go back to the nursery and divide things that I can divide and spread down here. That way I'm able to kind of stretch the garden budget while still creating a bed that looks full and lush. Anyways, hopefully that gives you some ideas as to where you can fill in and tuck plants around your garden space. Maybe you have a bed that's looking a little wonky and you can look at it a little bit more critically and see if you're seeing those layers and which one's missing. Is it a tall one? Is it a middle one? Is it the shorter one? There's lots of plants available to us and really cool varieties that could fit in kind of either of those layers. And so it's just about going out there and having fun and experimenting. Like I said before, sometimes the best combinations that you come up with are just honest accidents. You planted them together because you weren't sure where you were going to plant things, and they end up looking great together, and those are often my favorite ones. So just get out there and have fun and plant. Another topic that was requested in my plant haul video was how I plant in the Georgia heat and in the Georgia clay. So I will do that in a separate video because this is getting way too long and going into too many different tangents. So look for that. And as always, I want to say thank you for watching, leaving a comment, hitting the thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. And thank you if you have subscribed or if you're new and you are planning on subscribing, and I will see you in the next video.